Have you ever felt like you're wearing armor? A heavy, polished, and impenetrable armor, forged over the years with the metal of other people's expectations and the fire of our own fear. An armor designed to protect us from judgment, rejection, and pain. I know this armor intimately. For years, I didn't just wear it. I was his architect, his blacksmith, and his prisoner. I believed, as many of us were taught, that strength was synonymous with invulnerability. To be strong was to have all the answers. It was to never show doubt. It was to be the unshakable pillar for everyone around. My life was a meticulous performance of competence and control. I built tall walls around my heart, convinced that they would keep me safe. And for a while, it seemed to work. I was seen as strong, reliable, resilient. But what no one saw was the cost. No one saw the crushing weight of the armor each morning, the exhaustion of maintaining the facade impeccable, the deep loneliness that echoed within that steel fortress. The armor that protected me from the world also isolated me from it. It kept me from being truly seen, from genuinely connecting, from receiving the warmth and support that my soul secretly craved. The great and paradoxical turn of my life did not happen when I managed to forge an even stronger armor. It happened on the day when, by force of circumstances, it broke. It happened when, amidst the wreckage of my own invincibility, I was forced to face my naked truth. It was the moment I accepted my vulnerability that, for the first time, I discovered what it was like to be truly strong. Our society has a complicated relationship with vulnerability. We applaud her in inspirational speeches and biographies, but we penalize her in real life. In the workplace, uncertainty is seen as incompetence. In social relationships, need is often labeled as need. And in ourselves, self-criticism attacks any sign of weakness with relentless ferocity. And so, from an early age, we learn to hide the parts of ourselves that are most human. Fear, doubt, sadness, the need for help. I became an expert in this concealment. My life was compartmentalized into different versions of force. At work, I was the problem solver, the professional who never said, "I don't know," even though uncertainty corroded me inside. I spent sleepless nights researching to get all the answers, not out of diligence, but out of fear of being exposed as a fraud. My competence was a wall built with the cement of anxiety. With friends, I was the counselor, the friendly shoulder always available. People came to me with their broken hearts and their existential crises, and I offered wisdom and stability. But I never revealed my own storm. I believed that my role was to be the rock, and rocks don't fall apart. This dynamic created a subtle and dangerous imbalance. I was a safe haven for others, but I myself was adrift in a sea of unexpressed feelings, without a port to call my own. In the family, I was the pillar, the person who kept calm in the midst of chaos, who organized, who planned, who absorbed everyone's anxiety without ever showing mine. I became so good at swallowing my own needs that over time, I forgot they existed myself. I convinced myself that my strength lay in my ability to not need anything or anyone. But this strength was an illusion, and the price of it was exorbitant. The first cost was exhaustion. Maintaining a suit of perfection requires a monumental amount of energy. It is a state of constant vigilance. Every word, every gesture, every interaction is calculated to maintain the image. I would go to bed and wake up tired, not from a physical fatigue that sleep repairs, but from a tiredness of the soul, the fatigue of a performance that never ended. The second cost was anxiety. To live behind armor is to live with the perpetual fear of being discovered. The fear that someone will see the cracks, that the mask will fall off and reveal the flawed and frightened person behind it. That fear became the constant soundtrack of my life, a low-frequency hum that robbed me of peace and spontaneity. I couldn't relax, I couldn't be impulsive, I couldn't just be, because every moment was a potential risk of exposure. The third and most painful cost was loneliness. The armor that kept me from being hurt also kept me from being touched. True human connection doesn't happen from armor to armor, it happens from heart to heart, and mine was under lock and key. I had people around me, people who liked my persona, my strength, my usefulness, but I felt deeply alone because no one knew my true self. I longed for intimacy, but my own fortitude made it impossible. How could anyone truly love me if I never showed them who I really was? Fortresses like mine do not fall by choice. They fall out of necessity. The universe, or life, has a way of showing us that our defenses have become our greatest prison. For me, the breakdown came in the form of a burnout that was both professional and emotional. It was a period in which everything that could go wrong did. a crucial project at work, on which I had staked my entire reputation as infallible, failed spectacular. At the same time, an important personal relationship entered a crisis that my logic and control could not fix. The combined pressure of these two events was the battering ram that finally broke through my wall. I remember one particular day, sitting in my living room after receiving the final news about the failure of the project. I should be planning my next move, putting together a recovery strategy, wearing my resilience armor. But I couldn't. There was no more energy. The performance was over. The actor had forgotten his line. For the first time in my adult life, I stopped fighting. I surrendered. I allowed myself to feel the crushing weight of failure, disappointment, fear. And I cried. Not a controlled, silent cry, but a convulsive, primal cry that seemed to come from a place I had kept locked up for decades. At that moment, on the floor of my living room, surrounded by the wreckage of my carefully constructed identity, I was completely and terrifyingly vulnerable. My first instinct was shame. The shame of having failed, of having let myself get to that point, of being seen in that state. The voice of my inner critic screamed, "I told you so. You're not strong enough. You are a fraud." I wanted to hide, disappear, rebuild my walls as soon as possible. But something different happened. In the midst of that storm of emotions, a friend called. My first reaction was not to answer, to wait until I could put my mask back together. But by some impulse that to this day I can't explain, I answered. And when he asked, "How are you?" instead of my standard response, "I'm fine, how about you?" the words that came out amid sobs were, "I'm not okay at all. I think I blew it." That was the act, the moment I stopped fighting my vulnerability and instead accepted it. I verbalized it. I put her into the world. I surrendered to my own humanity. And I waited for the final blow, the trial, the penalty, the abandonment. The blow I expected never came. What came on the other end of the line was not advice, a solution, or a catchphrase. What came was silence, a compassionate, present silence, and then a phrase that changed the course of my life. He said, "I felt that way too. Tell me what happened." At that moment, my perception of reality changed. My vulnerability, which I had always seen as a repellent, as proof of my inadequacy, had become an invitation to connection. She had not created a chasm between me and my friend. She had built a bridge. By sharing my pain, I didn't push him away. I brought him closer. I gave him permission to take off his own armor and share the scars of his own battles. Our conversation that night was not about finding solutions, but about sharing the human experience in its rawest and most honest form. For the first time, I didn't feel like the counselor or the rock. I felt simply like a human being, connected to another human being. And the feeling was not one of weakness, but of relief and strength that I had never known. That experience became my first big lesson about the power of vulnerability. It is the language of authentic connection. We think that people connect with our strength, but they connect with our humanity. And our humanity resides in our imperfection. By daring to show my cracks, I discovered that I was not alone. I discovered that everyone around me also had their own armor, their own battles, their own fears. Vulnerability became the key that opened the door to real intimacy. My relationships began to transform. The conversations became deeper, more honest, more meaningful. I stopped trying to impress people and started allowing myself to be seen by them. And in the process, I began to see myself in a different way. Vulnerability was not my shame. It was my courage. It was not my weakness. It was my most secret and most potent superpower. It was the beginning of a new way of living, where strength was not measured by the height of my walls, but by the courage to live without them. After discovering that vulnerability was the path to connection, I began to realize that it was also the secret to a strength I had always misunderstood. Resilience. My old definition of resilience, forged in my fortress of illusions, was that of being unbreakable. Being resilient for me was like being a rock in the middle of a storm, impassive, unyielding, impenetrable. I believed that strength was in not feeling the impact of the winds, in not letting the waves move me. What I didn't understand was that rocks, under enough pressure, don't bend, they break, they shatter. Vulnerability introduced me to a new model of resilience, not that of the rock, but that of bamboo. Bamboo survives the storm not because of its rigidity, but because of its flexibility. It bends in the wind, sometimes until it touches the ground, but it doesn't break. And when the storm passes, it returns to its position, perhaps a little stronger, with roots a little deeper. True resilience is not the ability to avoid falling. It is the grace to bow down and the strength to get back on your feet. Accepting my vulnerability is what allowed me, for the first time, to be like bamboo. By admitting to myself and others that I was suffering, that I had failed, that I didn't have all the answers, I stopped fighting the wind. I allowed myself to bow. And in that act of giving in, I found immense power. Vulnerability is the mechanism of healing. You can't heal a wound that pretends doesn't exist. By allowing myself to be vulnerable, I was able to finally clean my wounds instead of just covering them with the armor. Asking for help, which I had previously seen as the final certificate of failure, turned out to be the smartest and most strategic act I could take. Vulnerability allowed me to access the resources around me, the wisdom of a friend, the comfort of a family member, the perspective of a mentor. I found that resilience isn't an individual sport, it's a team sport. We get back up faster and stronger when we allow others to help us get up. This new resilience changed the way I faced challenges. I stopped being afraid of failure, because failure stopped being a death sentence for my identity and became part of the learning process. I knew that if I fell, I wouldn't have to pretend everything was okay anymore. I could feel the pain, learn the lesson, ask for help, and get back on my feet again, with more wisdom and more compassion for myself and others. My strength was no longer in my ability to never fall, but in my unwavering confidence that no matter how many times I fell, I would always find a way back. With resilience as my new foundation, I discovered the third and perhaps most active power of vulnerability: courage. I used to think that courage was the absence of fear. It was the quality of heroes, warriors, those who acted with unshakable certainty. My quest for invulnerability was, in essence, an attempt to eliminate fear from my life. But vulnerability has taught me that this is not only impossible, but also undesirable. Vulnerability is, at its core, the awareness of risk and uncertainty. And courage, I learned, is not to act in the absence of fear, but to act in the presence of it. Courage is feeling the fear of being judged, of failing, of being rejected, and yet choosing to show yourself. Therefore, vulnerability is not the opposite of courage. It is your birthplace. Everything that really matters in life requires vulnerability. Falling in love is an act of vulnerability. You give your heart without guarantees. Starting a creative project is an act of vulnerability. You expose a part of your soul to the world, not knowing how it will be received. Having an honest and difficult conversation is an act of vulnerability. You risk the comfort of harmony for the possibility of a deeper connection. Leading is an act of vulnerability. It means admitting that you don't have all the answers and trusting your team. By accepting my vulnerability, I unlocked a new level of courage that I didn't know I possessed. The greatest fear that paralyzed me, the fear of being seen as imperfect, had already been faced. And once you face your greatest fear, all the others become smaller. I began to take risks that my former self, the architect of the fortress, would never have considered. I started sharing my ideas more openly at work, without the need for them to be perfect. Some were brilliant, others not so much, but the process made me more creative and innovative. I started having those difficult conversations in my relationship, expressing my needs and my fears honestly. Some of these conversations were painful, but all of them led to a deeper understanding and a more authentic love. I started saying, "I don't know and I need help" more often, and I found that instead of diminishing the respect people had for me, it increased it. They saw not only my competence, but my humanity. Courage stopped being a heroic performance and became a daily practice of showing myself as I really was. And that brings me to the final pillar, the culmination of this whole journey, the strength of authenticity. The armor of invulnerability not only separates us from others, it separates us from ourselves. Behind the masks and defenses, our true self is suffocated, forgotten. Accepting vulnerability is ultimately the act of giving ourselves permission to be who we really are. This is perhaps the quietest and most powerful form of force. Authenticity is the strength of living in alignment with your own values, passions, and truths, regardless of external approval. And the energy that this releases is immeasurable. All the energy I spent maintaining my fortress, the surveillance, the performance, the damage control, was released. And I was able to reinvest that energy in things that really mattered, in creating, in learning, in loving, in contributing. Living authentically brought a lightness to my life that I had never experienced. The chronic anxiety of being discovered was replaced by a deep calm. The need to impress has been replaced by the joy of expressing myself, the solitude of my fortress has been replaced by the rich tapestry of genuine connection. This authentic force is not noisy. You don't need to prove yourself. It is a quiet trust that comes from within. It's the peace of knowing that you're enough, just as you are. It's the freedom of no longer having to fit into a mold that wasn't made for you. It's the joy of finally feeling at home in your own skin. That's the ultimate victory of vulnerability, not just finding your strength, but finding yourself. The journey out of the fortress of illusions has taught me the most fundamental lesson of my life. The strength we desperately seek to build through walls and armor already exists within us. It is not in our ability to be impenetrable, but in our courage to be open. It is not in our perfection, but in our humanity. Vulnerability is not a weakness to be overcome. It is our most fundamental nature and our greatest source of power. It is the cradle of connection, resilience, courage, and authenticity. The armor we wear to protect us from the pain of the world is the same one that keeps us from experiencing the joy of connection, the beauty of intimacy, and the strength to truly be ourselves. If you today feel the weight of your own armor, if you're tired of performing, pretending, hiding, if you crave strength that is not exhausting but energizing, know that the way is not to build higher walls. The way is to find the courage to open a gate. I do not ask you to tear down your fortress today. That would be scary and reckless. But I invite you to a small act of courage, a small experiment in vulnerability. Choose a trusted person in your life, and the next time she asks how you're doing, dare to answer with a little more honesty. Dare to share a small uncertainty, a small fear, a small imperfection. Not to complain or to seek solutions, but simply to be seen. Watch what happens. Notice the bridge that forms where there was once a wall. This small act can be the beginning of your own journey of discovery, the first step in reclaiming the strength that already exists behind your armor. What about you? What's the first piece of your armor that you feel ready to let go? What little vulnerability can you allow yourself to show today as a gift to yourself and to the world? Share your reflection in the comments. Your courage may be the permission someone else needs to begin their own journey. If this reflection helped you see strength in a new way, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Together, we can continue to explore these paths to a more authentic, courageous, and deeply connected life. See you in the next video. And remember, true strength is not what you hide. That's what you have the courage to show.